Okay. And we are live. All right. This is so fun because behind the scenes, we've already started having our conversations about some of these updates. So I think this is a great conversation that we're definitely going to bring to you. But hello and welcome to the Pregame podcast for the Interactive HR Legal Workshop coming up next week, Thursday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Made Plainfield. And the event is called Real Cases, Real Solutions. And we're going to be looking through SHRM's 6 policy pillars, the lenses of those 6 policy pillars. Hi, my name is Tracy Justice, Director of Government Affairs with IndySHRM. And on behalf of the GAC, which is the Government Affairs Committee, Alicia Moreno, who is the Director at Large, and committee members Michelle Leeks and Shelley Scissor-Wonky. And if I said your name incorrectly, Shirley, you can definitely come on social media and correct me. I'm okay with that. Now, before I jump into my spiel, I want to go ahead and let the attorneys introduce themselves. You're going to tell us your name, your role, and the organization you're with, and your niche of practice. Starting with Shelley.
Very good. Thank you so much. Excited to be here today and part of this conversation. My name is Shelley Jackson, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Krieg, DeVault. I primarily practice in the area of labor and employment.
And go ahead, Brooke. I'm sorry, Brooke, Shannon, then Chris.
Absolutely. My name is Brooke Salazar. I am with Business Solver, and I'm the Senior Director of Compliance, and my practice is employee benefits, and I also do employment law.
Hi, I'm Shannon Middleton. I'm a partner at Gutwein Law, and I'm a business law attorney, and I focus on general business, mergers, acquisitions, and employment law, advising clients about questions, drafting agreements and policy handbooks, and conducting investigations.
And I'm Chris Sears. I'm a senior counsel at ICE Miller here in Indianapolis, and I've been in practicing employee benefits for 25 some years.
Now that is awesome. I mean, you say it so nonchalantly, but that I'm just really excited for the amount of knowledge and wisdom and insights that we're going to have in the room. Just to give everyone an idea of the different 6, the SHRM 6 policy pillars that we're going to be working on. Shelley Jackson is going to be championing the workforce development, really with a focus on AI. Brooke Salazar is going to be looking at workplace inclusion, and we have a great conversation that we're going to talk about today, real quick, leading up to the event. Shannon is going to be championing our workplace flexibility and leave. But just even when you described what you're talking about there, it looks like there's some aspects of workplace governance, so that'll be great too. And then Chris is going to be championing healthcare as well. And then Shelley also is going to touch a little bit on immigration. Because immigration and governance, we're not going to have attorneys necessarily just championing that, but with all of the knowledge that is going to be in the room, you can expect that we're going to have fun interacting with some cases and then understanding how to think about these cases. Now, I want to talk about the reason why I want to do this event real quick, why we're doing this event in such a different way. Because first we're going to do case studies where we're going to have different tables, and we'll switch from the different tables, giving everyone an opportunity to work through a case study that is in alignment with one of SHRM's 6 policy pillars. And then after that, we're going to end with a panel discussion with the attorneys. Now, why am I doing it this way? I have been in this role for quite a few years, and I would say that as I'm on my way out, I finally figured out a way to really show up in this space. And it seems as if we should really be talking about what SHRM's policy pillars are, not because I want to force it down people's throats, but I want us as HR professionals to be able to understand SHRM's policy pillars, but then also understand it through practice. There's a lot of us who may not have experienced some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and some of the things that you'll hear when we're all in the room. However, when we can all come together, have conversations together, share, of course, with anonymization, it helps us all learn and build our business acumen as far as like building strategy for our workplaces and understanding how to move forward. So let's see, what notes that I have just to make sure that I didn't chat. But one of the things that I want to talk about, let's talk about, Brooke, what you started. You started the conversation earlier, and I want to jump into that because I didn't necessarily have this particular topic on my radar, but I think it's great that you brought this up. So we're hearing that because of the government shutdown, that there's, people are feeling, executives are hearing messaging from different news agencies that regulations in federal government has dropped. So it's okay. We can chill out and relax, right? Like, don't worry about compliance, because it doesn't matter to them. And so it doesn't matter to us. Now, what's wrong with that sort of messaging? Where can we go wrong as HR professionals? And then let's get into that conversation. And then we'll talk about how can we look at it differently. Go ahead, Brooke.
Sure. I used to be an HR professional before I went to law school.
And that's why you're here.
That is why I'm here. And I just shout out to Chris. I had the opportunity to work with him over 10 years ago, and I still remember how great of an ERISA attorney he is. So I just want to put that plug in there. I haven't worked with him for a decade, but he is one of the best I've interacted with. So we know as HR professionals that executives, no one wants to spend money on non-glamorous overhead items, right? And we know that sometimes when the economy is struggling, that overhead can be some of the first folks that are cut, right? And part of that looks like compliance. And when we're hearing, and our executives are hearing from news sources that agency staffing has been reduced, the numbers of complaints have been reduced, brought by the agencies, that means they're not having to invest as much, right, into compliance. And I know for HR folks, that can be such a struggle because we know better, right? And being able to put words to what that actually looks like in the actual business case is what I think is so important. And so I would pass it to one of my esteemed colleagues because I get to hear a lot from the HR community, which I'm very grateful for. But I would like to also pass it over to Chris to talk about, especially with employee benefits, we're rolling up annual enrollment for some folks, and what does compliance look like now that we're seeing what the news is almost phrasing as deregulation. And so I would ask Chris, what are you hearing, but what's the risk, and how can HR folks communicate that effectively to their executive? And that 2.5 seconds, right? When that executive sticks their head into the office and is like, hey, I heard this, it must be true. We're not going to do Mental Health Parity Act anymore. See you later. And so I would ask Chris how he would respond.
Yeah. And, we sort of had a conversation about this before we went live, and, everybody made some great points, and I'll probably repeat some points that other people made. But, the fact is that every administration takes positions on what they're going to enforce and what they're not going to enforce. And, you have to sort of separate out, you've got administration policy and what the agencies are going to enforce, but you've still got private litigants, right? You've got plaintiffs out there. You've got your employees who are participating in your benefit plans, for example, and they can still sue you, right? It means the Department of Labor might not come after you for not doing, a mental health parity comparative analysis, but that doesn't mean that someone in your plan who feels like that they're not getting the mental health benefits that they're due under the plan, they still have a right of action under ERISA. So yeah, the DOL might not come after you, but you can still get sued. And of course, you don't need a lawyer to tell you litigation is super expensive, even if you prevail. It's super expensive. And there's just the PR nightmare of, someone out there saying you're discriminating against people with a behavioral health issue. So, these things still exist. And by the way, administrations turn over every 4 or 8 years. And, the next administration may decide they want to enforce whatever policy you've been ignoring for the past 4 years. And they can look backwards, by the way, and say, well, you were doing this 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now we're in charge and we're going to come after you for that. So, I think it's dangerous to sort of pass all of this off and say, well, we're not going to worry about compliance right now, because there are still multiple risks that still exist, even if a government agency is saying, well, we're not going to come after you because lots of other people will. And
Now,
Shelley,
what about Title VII? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to ask the same question, Tracy.
Yeah, so from the employment law side of things, it's very much what you said, Chris, and it is something that we experience. Brooke, you set it up so well, right? Which is there are so many pressures. There's cost pressure, time pressure, resource pressure, all of those things, and it can feel, because of the sort of the narrative that we are part of, that we see announcements and memos, and there's conversation happening within our society in lots of different ways. It can feel like it's an entirely different risk management, regulatory framework, compliance framework. And in some ways, some of those things do change over time. Chris articulated it very well. New administrations, new priorities. The regulatory agencies can certainly set their own priorities and their own enforcement activities. They can decline to enforce. They can enforce stringently, all of those things. At the end of the day, though, the regulatory environment is driven by the statutory underpinnings. So, for example, Title VII, which I heard you mention, I think, Tracy, that's a great example. So Title VII is our omnibus, anti-discrimination law. It covers lots of different protected characteristics. And even if there's a de-emphasis on certain types of enforcement within Title VII, disparate treatment was one of the comments that we were coming up with and discussing before this started. Just because there's a de-emphasis on enforcement there doesn't mean that the statute has changed, and it also doesn't really track, your risk doesn't track across the entire experience of, okay, you've got the EEOC that would be involved, or a state regulating agency serving in that stead. But then you also have courts that are involved. You may have a trial court, you may have juries listening to this, and the statutory underpinnings haven't changed. And so I think that's a good example of how, steadiness and an eye toward compliance, even when the environment feels chaotic or like it's shifting, is a great strategy to manage risk. It's an essential strategy to manage risk.
I would ask the panel too, if I were talking to an executive, which would you prefer to deal with? An agency investigator or a plaintiff's bar attorney trying to build a class? Shannon, what do you think?
I don't think you don't want the plaintiff building a class action. I mean, that is probably an employer's worst nightmare. On the
Now,
flip
what does
side,
it
it's
look
very-
like when you say that? What does that mean? Like an employee building a class action?
So a plaintiff's attorney can seek out multiple employees that have been affected, maybe per se, by a wage failure to pay a wage claim, maybe not properly classifying an employee as exempt, failing to pay minimum wage. Like there's a variety of different things. So they group all those plaintiffs together. So you have this large group of plaintiffs that are suing their employer. So that just intensifies the amount of damages, the time, the litigation costs. On the flip side, from the agencies performing their audits and regulations, it's much more efficient and a better practice to keep the consistent compliance maintenance than it is to try to scramble if you get a notice from an agency that they're going to audit your I-9s and you've got, a very short window. It's very difficult to try to get your ducks in a row if you've not been complying over time.
And if I can just jump in there for a second.
Yes.
I'd rather deal with a government regulator every day of the week.
Okay. That's giving me perspective.
Well, and it's, in my experience, the governmental regulators, I mean, they're there to do a job, right? They're there to enforce the law or their perception of the law. But, they're professional. And I'm not saying plaintiffs' attorneys are professionals, but they have a different role, right? They want to get money for their client, and it is adversarial. With a government regulator, yes, it is adversarial on some level, but it's easier to pick up the phone and talk to them and talk them through what your client's been doing, how they've been trying to comply. And, many of the governmental regulators, they don't want to beat you up necessarily. They want to ensure compliance. And if you can often come up with an arrangement with them, some sort of compliance plan. And so the relationship is very different than it is when you are getting sued. So, again, we sort of go back to what we were talking about a second ago. Just because the governmental regulators might be sort of going a little easy right now on compliance enforcement, plaintiff's bar isn't, and they're not going to stop. And so that means you need to remain compliant.
Now, for HR professionals, we know that sometimes the HR is not in a position where they have authority to really push back sometimes. And right now we know that, the attorneys here that are present here are not your attorneys, legal disclaimer. So we're just here having conversation, just kind of, having conversations about things, but we're not giving you particular advice here, right? So definitely want to make sure that if you have questions, you can definitely reach out to the attorneys and solidify a relationship moving from there. But what can you say? Like, what can HR do in these positions where they don't have authority, but they see some of these things happening? Like, how do they go about that? How do they document, audit, or make sure that they're doing what they need to do to stay safe, if that's even a thing to do?
So could I tell a story? Is that okay?
Oh, yes.
Turning into my mama, I'm like, let me educate you with a story, or a Golden Girls, if you get that reference. Picture it, baby Brooke, HR. There was a complex employee relations situation. I had talked through the risks. Counsel had talked through the risks with our CFO. CFO went one way, and frankly, the cat jumped the other, right? And so when it came down to letting the board know this is what's happening, this is the amount of money, etc., I got the feedback back, well, you didn't tell me what it meant to the business. You just told me what it meant legally or compliance wise. And so that is where I think it's so essential for HR folks to be able to speak the language of the CFO or the person making the decision. And so I would absolutely encourage you to not just speak from if you get into HR, it's because I think you want to do right and you want to do what's best for employees. But you always have to say, how does it impact the business? And how am I going to make a business case for why
That's the
not
word.
drop
Yes.
compliance?
Yeah.
And frankly, and I'll say this like a peek behind the window, right? It's not just it's a case for your job. It's justification. Why is HR so essential? Well, it's so essential just to exactly what my esteemed colleagues were speaking to. If you ask me which is more expensive, a class action lawsuit against a plaintiff's bar attorney, who PS we love, they keep us honest, right? Love. Or an agency investigation, enforcement action, that, in my experience, that litigation is going to be more expensive every single time than a normal enforcement action. So that absolutely impacts your bottom line, right? Also, too, we know that compliance and law, like that bar is low. It's a low bar, right? And it's just the foundation of the house. It's not the house. So when we're talking about retaining employees, attracting employees, being able to say all compliance really is, I'm a very simple person and I like to break it down. What is compliance? Compliance is ensuring that you are holding people's money in a trusted way. It's ensuring that no one's being harassed or discriminated against. However, if we take it one step further and we say, hey, your benefits, we know benefits is more important to a lot of folks than their actual compensation. So having a tight compliance program regarding employee benefits is saying, hey, we understand this is really important to you, and we're making sure you're not being improperly deducted. You're taking home what you should, and your retirement savings, we're doing the best job we can to keep those safe in the market that we're in, right? And so being able to say it's not just the right thing to do, or in a couple years something could shift. It is about saying, this is the cost. this is how it's going to impact the business. And if you're out there doing RFPs and they're asking, hey, what litigation have you had regarding discrimination or your role as a fiduciary, right? You're going to have to answer that. And so that's where it is very beneficial to the business to understand you're not operating in a vacuum. You have an employer brand, you have a consumer brand. Social media is 1000% a thing, right? I don't know any executive that wants to deal with a social media backlash. But
Have
also
a class action. Oh God, yeah.
Right. But also it is about you're treating people the best way that you can. But we know discrimination impacts revenue, right? Discrimination, harassment negatively impacts revenue. We know inclusive studies have shown us over and over and over again, inclusive cultures increase revenue. So that is where I would say compliance programs, not as sexy as a new applicant tracking system, but they have an impact on revenue. They are the guardrails for these types of programs.
So I hear you say business case, and I love that because the business case does bring the onus back to the HR person to say, okay, it's not simply just tell them that in passing by, what's not legal. It's about doing your research, understanding, especially who you're going to present it to, making sure you understand what language they speak, and adapting your business case to really feed them the way they like to eat information, right? Pretty much. And then you also talked about culture, building that culture. So if the culture is not already there, then maybe building that business case. What else would you say, Shannon, Chris, Shelley, to what can HR, professionals do in this sort of instance where, executives are hearing things and bringing it down, but HR knows better. But sometimes they don't have the authority or the power to really act. But I mean, business case is a great one. What else would you all say?
Well, I guess what I would say, I think lawyers and HR people are often in the same role there, right? Clients don't take my advice sometimes, and they don't because they have other business concerns, right? And certainly when I was a baby lawyer, it's like I was very focused on, okay, this is the legal thing to do, right? And you're sort of very black and white. I think as you grow as a lawyer, for example, the same way, you grow as an HR person, you see the bigger picture, right? You work with clients enough. If you're an HR person, you work with your CFO and your CEO long enough that you see, okay, well, there are other issues out there in the world and other things you have to take into consideration. And so you tailor your advice in that way, which is really the point Brooke was making. I think that sort of rolling out the risks and, whether that's sort of citing them a bunch of cases, it's citing, a bunch of, enforcement actions. It's, citing, what kind of damages have been received in these cases or the kinds of penalties that can be enforced. That, as to Brooke's point, that gets their attention a little bit. And certainly in the employee benefits context, when you tell them that they're fiduciaries of employee benefit plans, and as fiduciaries, they are personally liable and someone can come and take their house, that gets their attention too, most times. So, it's, you do everything and you document it, right? You document it, to Brooke's point, that the CFO was saying, well, you never told me this stuff. Yeah, I did. And here's the email or here's the letter, whatever else. And then at some point you have to accept you can't make the decision. They get to make the decision, but you've got to inform them as best you possibly can.
No, I Shelley, Shannon, anything else to add to that?
I was thinking about, as we were talking about this, I guess is more of an overarching comment, but I think, so one of the things that one of the superpowers of HR professionals is managing so many different priorities and so many different stakeholders. So you've got like all of these different stakeholders, and human resources professionals, maybe more than anyone in the organization, are getting that 360 view of the stakeholders, right? They are typically privy to information that not everyone has. They're typically part of conversations that not everyone may be part of. So even when they're not certain, maybe if they're not sitting in the boardroom having those conversations, they have a view that is very comprehensive. And I think that part of it is understanding as human resources professionals that there is not an ability to operate an incredibly successful business or any type of business without risk. And so the task for an HR professional isn't to completely shut down any possibility that something bad will happen. Bad things happen. Despite our best intentions, despite our best efforts, despite our diligence, all of those things, bad things happen. But the role here is to really think about those stakeholders, provide the information that's needed to make a decision. I love how Chris kind of walked through that process of identifying risks, mapping out those risks. That's the other thing. Sometimes risks can feel very acute and high, and that may or may not be true. So I think I just think the 360 view that human resources professionals have is such a great way to think about this, the various stakeholders, and understanding that you aren't being called in to eliminate the possibility that something bad will happen, because you can't operate a business that way. Your job is to partner with legal, to partner with executives, to partner with other human resources professionals, to partner with your business units, to manage that risk, to understand that risk, to define the risk, and then move forward. And I think that's where the compliance mindset comes from. It doesn't mean you're perfect all the time. You have to build, you have to change, you have to evolve. What it means is that it remains a priority, even when that priority has to shift, adjust, ramp up, ramp down. And sometimes those things are driven by what we've been talking about. There's a claim. That's a great incentive to look at compliance, and it's not the best incentive, right? The best incentive is before the big claim happens, but it happens. And that's part of our job as attorneys, to partner with human resources professionals in navigating what sometimes feels like an impossible landscape, but I do think is one of the most important vantage points you can have within an organization, which is vision into stakeholder perspectives.
I love that. I love that. Shannon, do you have anything you want to add before?
I think these were all great points. Hopefully the HR professional, like in their 360 review and in their analysis and explaining the risk, they feel heard, and that their executive leadership takes their view into consideration, but ultimately they feel peace that it's probably not their ultimate decision.
I love what, okay, go ahead, Brooke.
I would also
go ahead.
say the career growth for the HR professional is near and dear to my heart. So as we are finishing up open enrollment, annual enrollment season, number one, big shout out to HR folks for being here. I completely understand the stress you've been under managing all the fall activities plus annual enrollment. Thank you for spending your time with us. However, make sure that you are documenting in your performance reviews all of your compliance actions that they're taking, because nobody likes to, right? No executives like, tell me everything you did with compliance today. No one wants to hear that. They would be in compliance, right? They don't want to hear it. So how do you convey your worth as an HR professional? And I will say at Business Solver, we put together a KPI tracker around, because I'm the senior director for the product compliance dashboard, but documenting what those compliance activities are for your performance review. And if you are documenting your compliance activities for your performance review, number one, you should be, and you should do that right now. And number two, go ahead and put in there penalties of what happens, consequences, when it's not done correctly. Notices, are they the sexiest thing in the world? Thank you for asking. No, they're not. Are there penalties associated with not delivering them? Yes, there are. So make sure that you're building that into your own performance reviews so that your executive, when they look at it, they understand the benefit and the value that you're bringing to your, not just your compliance program, but also your bottom line and your business's revenue.
I love this conversation. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one last point that as a lawyer, and HR professionals can't quite say this as the same, but that I talk to clients when we're talking about compliance is, you know what, you can pay me now, you can pay me later. We can do this now and put a compliance program in place. And, I charge money and it's good. Or we can wait until, the class action lawsuit that Shannon was describing comes in, or you can pay me then. It's sort of the stitch in time saves nine kind of, but that's a communication that kind of comes through sometimes too.
No, and I
Stay
love
ready
that.
so you don't have to get ready, is what I say.
That's right.
Stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I'm passionate about government affairs and really understanding how all of it comes together. Because I do believe that understanding this, not necessarily to be a lawyer or an attorney, but understanding this so that you can really show up in HR with the full power of understanding what our tools are and creating a business case, understanding, like Chris, you had mentioned citing cases and enforcement actions, like things that are happening, that we can bring that up as part of the business case. It gives us more credibility in the HR role as well when we're showing up in this sort of way and letting our executives know. And I love who said partner with, because somebody was saying partner with, and I had to just write down the word. I love that. Yes, you partner with the people that you're working with in HR, right? We're not telling them what to do, but we're just telling them, hey, this is what happened here, and it could possibly happen here. And like Chris says, we can pay an attorney, we can pay it, we can do what we need to do now or pay for it later. So I love that. So what I'm going to do, because I know that we said we're going to end it at 10:45. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just share some of SHRM's policies, their frameworks, just give some information and then see if there's anything that you want to add to that to help HR to really process it a little bit further. Okay, so workforce development. Workforce development, SHRM calls for public-private partnerships, skills-based hiring, and employer-led investment to close talent gaps and future-proof the workforce. So it's all about how do we get a skills-first economy, employer investment, where they are expanding tax incentives and grants for training, public-private collaboration, building partnerships between employers and educational institutions and workforce boards, and then that federal alignment, supporting federal initiatives that align education outcomes with employer needs. That's workforce development. What would you add to, from our, distilled perspective?
I love that. I think, I know, like, I don't want to say DEI because that's a whole thing. However, when you are reaching out to universities to develop a pipeline, or even high schools, if you're in the trades are really good at building pipelines. Strongly consider reaching out to organizations that do not reflect your internal makeup currently, right? Reach out to organizations, educational facilities that aren't just where your CEO went. So expand what that looks like. We already have a you. We need more diversity of thought because it helps us build a better business because we can relate to our customers better, our prospects, etc. So I've seen a lot of organizations that are like, oh, I just love to recruit at X university. Well, strongly consider recruiting at an urban university, an urban school, that, if your executive leadership grew up in the suburbs, because you're going to bring people with a lot different experience and backgrounds that will be able to help what that looks like. And then I will also say, I know some folks have really stringent GPA requirements for that pipeline. And I will tell you when I was in charge of recruiting, I will take somebody that worked a full-time job, was a grown-up with real responsibilities that had a 3.4 instead of a 3.8 every day of the week, that has work experience before that. So I would say from an inclusion standpoint and just a workforce development look like, you're walking away from a lot of talent that brings a huge wealth of experience and dimension to your workplace. Yeah. So really look at your pipelines. And I will also say I had great great results with community churches and community leadership groups posting jobs there, because the community gets involved, and they, my neighbor would be great for this. And then I get an access to a neighbor I never would have gotten through a traditional mechanism.
And I love that you brought that up, because at the blueprint that was shown last week, I'll just mention that it was talked about we should have targeted recruiting, maybe not, so that we're not discriminating, targeted recruiting. And, Robbie Starbuck even questioned that, which, we thought was interesting, because we were, Johnny C. Taylor was, Van Jones actually, and then Johnny C. Taylor was agreeing with targeted recruiting. And he even, disagreed with that for diversity and inclusion. So that was just interesting. But, I think as HR people, we know targeted recruiting is okay. We're just making sure we're including everyone into the pool of possible candidates. But I just thought that was interesting. Did anyone else want to add to the workforce development before I moved on to the next one?
I would just,
okay.
On top of that, I would just say diversity of thought is always a good idea, and groupthink.
Always.
No one's ever said
Always.
Groupthink produces high revenue or great ideas.
No, it's just
You're
boring.
welcome.
But okay, so then the next one is workforce immigration. SHRM advocates for modern, predictable, and market-driven employment-based immigration policies that allow employers to access needed talent responsibly. So the advocacy principles here are modernization, update visa categories and streamline processing, employer responsibility, ensure employers retain accountability for compliance, workforce stability, allow U.S. employers to fill critical shortages while protecting domestic workers, and global competitiveness, recognize immigration as a tool for innovation and growth. Now, we know recently the H-1B visa went up. I don't remember what the price was before to get it done, but now went up to like $100,000. Is there anything that you want to add to what SHRM, stands for when we look at workforce immigration? That's good. That's good right there. Okay, that's good. That's perfect.
Chime in that, so the work I do in immigration is actually not the H-1Bs and the workforce credentialing. I work on the other side, which is preparedness and response. It is most of what I do. And it's not necessarily for, it may or may not involve employees who are immigrants, but it just may be, for example, immigration enforcement activity at a particular location. But I think this topic is incredibly important, and it is definitely something that I support having on the radar, and being, teaching organizations both how to navigate immigration for their workforce, but then also thinking about immigration from a broader standpoint, and ensuring that their HR professionals, their other professionals, frontline employees are well prepared and kind of understand that environment, which has been shifting very rapidly recently.
No, and I respect that, and thank you for clarifying that, because I do believe that for ICE preparedness is definitely important, because HR professionals might not be used to agents coming into the workplace and demanding or asking for things. It might be a little nerve-wracking to actually see them walking throughout the office, So I think, HR professionals just having an idea of how they should respond, what they should at least do to prepare for that, I think is a great conversation, is something great for HR professionals to know. So that's definitely something that, I'll be looking forward to hearing as well. Workplace inclusion. So SHRM emphasizes inclusive cultures as business imperatives, focusing on equity, accessibility, and representation across all employee experiences. So they're rooting for inclusive leadership, encourage workplace cultures that embrace diversity and belonging, equitable policy, support legislation that advances equal opportunity, accessibility, promote inclusive technologies and accommodations, and then that caregiver inclusion, right? Because there's a lot of us who are in that sandwich space where taking care of younger people as well as our elderly. So recognizing the link between inclusion, caregiving, and employee retention. Anything to add there or comment?
Well, I'll just say, Brooke said we can't say DEI anymore, but I'll say DEI. I think this is, a really hard spot for a lot of employers right now, right? Because I think there are a lot of employers that in good faith truly believe in DEI and workplace inclusion, yet certainly the political pressures and frankly, the economic pressures. I mean, there are a lot of employers, a lot of companies that are sort of being threatened with not getting contracts, right? Not getting contracts from the state or from the federal government or from, other kinds of companies if they have pronouns in their emails, whatever it is. And so I think this is a real struggle that companies are having both on the business side and then the HR side, because as Brooke correctly notes, diversity and inclusion has a direct correlation with success. And so I think this is, certainly a front of mind topic right now with HR people and with their executives. And it's going to be an ongoing struggle, I think, here for the next at least 3 years, right?
Wow. Yeah. Brooke,
I completely agree. And I think that when we talk about DEI, it can be easy to forget. We're talking about folks with disabilities.
Yeah.
We are talking about about older folks, right? The 40 plus folks. So when we're talking about these things and we're seeing things, our executives are seeing things on the news, it's so important to remind them, we see higher retention with folks with disabilities. And define disability. Disability includes things like anxiety and major medical depression and bipolar. So these are things that we can accommodate for, and we should. And then when I think about the study that just came out, that the wage gap has slid back for women, because to your point, the sandwich generation, taking care of kids at home and parents, and women are dropping out of the workforce. And so that is where we have to decide the financial success of having diversity of thought and allowing for what that empathy looks like. And I think foundationally, when we think about DEI, it is things like psychological safety, right? Psychological safety promotes innovation. Being able to bring your whole self to work and not fear making a mistake, that contributes directly to innovation and profit for your organization. And so when we think about these building blocks of what DEI looks like, all of those building blocks studies show again and again and again, they lead to financial success. And in today's economic climate, I don't know of any executive that wants to walk away from cash on the table.
But then they're forced with not getting contracts.
Right.
And so,
and that is the tough part, because that's here in the state of Indiana, you don't have to, add to it if you don't want to, but here in the state of Indiana, we know that the Attorney General has been given authority to look over and make sure that whoever they're working with does not have practices of DEI within their organization. So that is a very true comment. And I agree that it puts HR professionals in such a sticky place, because we know that in order to bring, because, it was said before, right? Compliance is just the ground that the devil dances on. But we know that in order to build culture, we have to come up with different strategies to bring everyone together. And when it's considered DEI, and we know that the word DEI is considered a bad word now in this space, but what do we call it? We know we have to bring people together no matter what. So whether it's called diversity, equity, inclusion, we still have to bring people together, but then still have to deal with financial situations that will cause a business to say, well, it is a tough situation, and it's happening here in the state of Indiana. So anything else to add to
focus on the building block? I think you focus on the building blocks. So I think you focus on like empathy in the workplace. Like, how can you build empathetic managers? How do you teach managers what harassment and discrimination looks like? Right. And I know we're at time, but I'm so excited to be able to meet with everyone. I think it's next week to say
Yes.
discrimination may look a little different than what we think it looks like. Does it look like dinging somebody on a performance review because they took FMLA? And if they'd only been here not having a baby, they would have met their numbers, right? Or I'm going to take you off of a more profitable shift because you're pregnant and I'm worried about your baby. And so that doesn't feel like discrimination, but that's where it goes back to, let's talk about practically what these things mean, which is why I'm so excited for the format of this great conference you put together, Tracy.
Oh my goodness, you guys are putting it together with me. Honestly, I do want to say just thank you to all of you, because sometimes I feel like I come up with just different ideas and I'm like, I don't know, because I've never done it before, but we're just going to try and we're going to see, we're going to learn from it, and then we'll do better. But I mean, how can it go wrong? You get everyone in the room, we start talking about different things. I mean, we're going to learn. We're all going to learn. Do you all have just a little bit more time, or do you have a hard stop? Because I just have three more pillars just to kind of share and see if you all have time. Do you all have time?
I do.
Shelley, you're good?
I apologize. I've got like 10 minutes if that gets us.
You said 10 minutes? You got
Yeah.
10? Okay, so then we'll go through real quick. Okay, so then the workplace healthcare. SHRM supports affordable, flexible, and employer-driven healthcare solutions that prioritize access, transparency, and mental health parity. Anything to add there real quick?
Yeah, just real quick, and we'll talk about this a lot more next week. This is a huge priority and a huge issue for employers because it is one of the main drivers of cost. And there's a tension again between the cost and wanting to provide your employees with the best benefits that you are able to provide them, because it bears directly on recruitment, it bears directly on retention, and it is a huge struggle. We're going to talk next week about PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, and drug benefits specifically. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about some contractual things to think about when you're dealing with PBMs, and some litigation that we've seen in that area. So I think I'm looking forward to a good discussion there.
Awesome. Now, workplace flexibility and leave. SHRM advocates for a voluntary uniform federal framework for paid leave that provides flexibility for employers and fairness for employees. Anything to share there?
Listen, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it's a very important topic for employee retention. It's also nuanced in that you've got compliance issues, you've got equity issues, ethical concerns, in trying to do what's best for your employees, but potential discrimination claims if you aren't treating everyone the same. So it's kind of a nuanced issue. It'll be good to have a discussion about it next week.
I agree, because I did a little bit research. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just put together a chart of earned paid sick leave, 22 states, and then you contrast it with paid family leave. And then you contrast it with federal FMLA, unpaid leave. And when I think about what those handbooks look like for multi-state employers, holy moly. And then you're asking HR folks who, raise your hand if you've ever seen an overstaffed HR department, to then compare and contrast and coordinate all those leaves. Just stop. So I think that's where a federal law would be really more helpful than not to multi-state employers.
I would agree, because this flexibility and leave seems like it intersects with so many other of the different policies, like whether it's inclusion, it's workplace governance. It seems like it can include everything. I saw a case about an ADA, an employee who was a retired employee, and he had benefits through his organization. He retired early because of a disability, and then the employer changed their benefits. And so now that retiree is no longer covered through the plan. And he was wanting to sue the employer for discrimination under the ADA. And, the employee rule, he wasn't a current employee, so he just didn't have any more benefits. So it was just really interesting just to kind of look at all those policies. So I know that there's going to be more intricate conversations in the room. Now, the last one, workplace governance. SHRM champions modern, balanced labor laws and workplace regulations that support compliance, innovation, and employer-employee collaborations. The 4 C's. Make sure there's clarity, simplify and clarify worker classification rules, consistency, ensure uniform enforcement, compliance, promote education and guidance over punitive regulation, and then collaboration. Foster that trust and accountability between employers and employees. Thoughts on that? Comments?
Fostering that trust when we talk about what happens when unions, right, unions are trying to make their ways into employers, and the successful outcomes that I have seen is when the employer can say, we have transparency and trust here. Tell me what this labor organization can do that we're not doing. And that is where that feels like a touchy-feely woo-woo thing, but there's an actual business case to be made for openness and transparency.
And I love that you said that, because as HR professionals, we do have that right. The organization does have the right to at least say, okay, what is it that we're not doing? What can we do? And not just, oh my God, they want to unionize us, so now we're not talking to anyone, sort of thing. So I love that. Okay, so then just to make sure that no one has to drop off before we wrap off, because I know Shelley's, because you guys are attorneys, so I know you guys you guys are busy. But I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to, for this pregame podcast style of what's going to happen next week. Be sure to register to join the Real Cases, Real Solutions legal event November 13th, next Thursday. It's going to be at Made Plainfield, but you must register for the event. It's going to be a lunch and learn workshop, sort of a lunch provided, interactive HR legal workshop with a panel to close out with. Do you all have any final words that you want to say before we wrap up?
Thank you, Tracy, for your vision and your ingenuity in putting this together. It's going to be a great conversation, and I couldn't be more excited to be part of this team. What a great group of people. So thank you for including me.
I'm so excited to be part of a practical and actionable panel and workshop that I cannot even stand it. Because sometimes it's not always fun to be the talking head either. So being able to give real practical and real actionable, not legal advice, but a view of what's going on in the environment, the legal landscape is incredible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
I echo the comments as well.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited. So we're going to close out here. So until next week, make sure you register for the event. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.